One of the biggest barriers to reality shifting that you will have to overcome, I'm still working on it, just FYI, and I've been doing this for now a number of years, is the mind's tendency to rationalize and fit reality into a logical template. And there's something I am predicting that this is because those of us who are coming from highly convergent societies where our education system taught us the right thing for the test. There's only one right answer. I've talked about this before. Convergent versus divergent thinking. And when we come from an educational background like that is heavily reinforced in our everyday world, what happens is that it orients the mind to almost be this highly structured tunnel vision. And so the way that we project into the world, if you imagine around your third eye, almost like this little tunnel that's expanding outwards in this little tiny point, that is the influence of your logical mind, that it takes this template of reality, this infinite potential, and it compresses it into a predictable funnel where the very end of it is this tiny little point, and that is what you see. And there's something about the mind's influence that will take magic and beauty in the world and crush it under the laws of logic and rationality. And those of you who are experienced in history, and especially the different branches of philosophy and how we developed our thinking abilities, our rational abilities, then you will know intimately that this is actually a temporary phase, that in our human society we have experimented with a variety of different thought patterns. Where we are at presently is one that still prizes and values logical and rational thinking. So as a result, our higher educational influences train us this way. And this is, in my opinion, what differentiates those who have college experience and those who do not. And this is one of, in my opinion, the values of higher education, even though there is a very big debate about the price of degrees and the system as a whole. I'm not talking about those pitfalls and those constructive criticisms. What I'm talking about is the way that it shapes the mind to be able to think critically, to analyze, particularly if you have a liberal arts or heavy science background. Well, I guess that covers everybody for the most part. And so as a result, you learn how to weigh evidence, how to think clearly, how to communicate constructively. And it, in my opinion, creates those that have an advantage in logical and rational systems. Is it necessary? No. People's intelligence is not measured by their degrees, but it frames the way that people can synthesize and process the world, which, when done correctly, and not every institution does this and not every degree does this, but when done correctly, it can actually be an advantage. But people can have these skills outside of higher education as well. So as a result, we have this predominant tendency to take something magical like reality shifting and at first rationalize it away. I remember being in Costa Rica and I invited a friend down. We did a little writer's creative retreat and holed up in an Airbnb, and it was great in the jungle, and wrote for like a weekend. They finished their sci-fi novel. When I was going to pick them up, I was experiencing a lot of reality shifting events, but they were mostly unawake to these ideas. And so, for example, the exit signs kept telling me impossible kilometers. And it was like, it was funny. I was taking video because it was like I was slipping in between two different timelines. And I would be progressing forward in time and then watching the exit ramps. And then it would be like I would be going backwards, even though I didn't stop and I didn't turn around or do anything crazy like that. And I was also experiencing some sensory indications of reality shift events as well that I don't have time to go into here. But so, needless to say, when I picked up my friend, and I actually picked them up at a different version of the airport than the one that I landed. And this is not the first time that this has happened. This has also happened in Singapore. And I believe that there are vortex areas that are travel hubs that have different versions of airports and train stations and things of that nature. And so when I picked them up, I remember sitting there and at the airport looking around at people and feeling like humans looked a little differently than what I was used to. And I also had that experience when I landed in LA on this part of my life path adjustment, but that's neither here nor there. So it's happened a couple times. This was like the third time that it happened to me. And so I was sitting there taking it in. I mean, even the facial features of the bone structure and the skin tone of some of the people, and there was a conference there. And so a lot of people were traveling internationally, and it was sort of this high vibe festival that actually I wanted to go to that I was not ready at that time. And some of the people that were going to that festival really looked like they stepped out of an entirely different world. So I picked up my friend, and there was some craziness with the finding the parking ticket machine and lots of like little tiny crazy things. But anyway, when we were driving to the part of Costa Rica that we were trying to get to, he was co-piloting, and I was shifting with him, but he didn't seem to notice that we were shifting. His story in his mind was that technology was being obstinate and being impossible. And this is what happens, right? When you start reality shifting, is that technology goes on the fritz and weird things can happen. Clocks can get desynchronized. So you can have your phone telling you one time, your computer telling you another time, and your watch or your car telling you a completely different time. And I've even seen the digital clocks on a stove shift between hours, forwards and backwards, as I was shifting between parallel planes and in a place that wasn't my own. And so lots of these sign calls can happen, and you get used to it as a reality shifter and a quantum leaper, a quantum jumper. And you start to train yourself to see them as reality shift events because this rebuilds your cognition. And when you're new at it, you doubt yourself a lot and you have a tendency to rationalize everything away. My friend got very, very frustrated, not really angry. He's not the angry type, but just very, very frustrated because technology was completely malfunctioning. And I don't even remember exactly what happened, but it was like, this happens, and I don't know if this happened in that particular case. You'll be using GPS, and then the GPS will spin you in circles, even though you're supposed to keep going straight. It'll keep telling you to exit and then to take a left, and you're like, no, my destination is straight ahead. You've told me 20 kilometers previously to keep going straight for 3 hours. Now why are you telling me to get off the highway and to suddenly take a left? It'll also tell you that certain gas stations or addresses are at certain places that are patently not. And I call those Q-style events. I have a couple screenshots of it. I've had a couple Ubers get lost to me in transit, raising the question of who's really supporting the back end here of reality shifting and all of these mysteries of the universe. It's really an intriguing question. Anyway, so I joked to my friend that we were interdimensionally shifting, but he was obviously not accepting of this premise. So he held this narrative of a very logical, rational one, that technology is screwy sometimes. And that's just that. I held a different meaning to it, which was we were reality shifting. And over time and over many, many years of exposure, you start to become accustomed to events like this. But the key is to allow the unfolding of the magical to happen. Usually when I work with clients, it doesn't always happen, but when people feel compelled to reach out to me, very often they're already undergoing shift events. And I've had some wild client stories in the first week that I've worked with people. One of them actually was eating a milk dud. He was outside at a park, and I had this vision of him sitting on a picnic bench and grounding himself and decompressing after our session. And I found out about this the next day, and he was eating a milk dud and pulled out a crown and was like, oh my God, I've got to go to the dentist. So he booked an appointment for like the next day, went into the dentist office, and he had taken the crown off the milk dud and placed it back in his mouth, but I guess it was like very loose. And so he was getting it repaired, and the dentist was like, which tooth is it again? And he was like, oh, it's this tooth. And the dentist was like, this is securely on. You're telling me that you pulled off your crown? And imagine his embarrassment sitting there in the chair. And the dentist is like, okay, well, I'm going to check everything out. And everything was completely, permanently fixed. And he even told me that the dentist didn't know what cement or adhesive was used. Like they didn't recognize the bonding material. And shortly thereafter, when he returned home, he received a call from a company that he personally knew was actually extinct and had long been extinct for quite some time. And so there are several stories like this. I have another client who I worked with recently, and after our work concluded and our sessions were really gearing her in preparation for reality shifting, I wasn't expecting that we were going to be able to shift her into shift events, but by day 2, she started having some indications that they were happening to her. So we talked about it. We created the frame of reference for it. We didn't logic and rationalize them away. My advice to you and to all of my clients is to not say that we are reality shifting, not at first, but to actually just make space for the potential. Because what you don't want to do is you don't want to say, oh, I'm definitely reality shifting, because very often there's a vacillation effect and a carryover effect. And so you'll get a sneak preview of a reality, but then you'll get snapped back. And what can happen is that if the mind is too eager, this is my experience, what can happen is that you get disappointed, and that disappointment feeds into your vibration and feeds into a negative thought loop, which then keeps you anchored into your baseline reality that ultimately you're trying to upgrade and optimize from. And so in this particular case, we made room for the reality shifting experience to be happening. There were some interesting key things that happened that I won't reveal. It just feels a little personal. But at the end of it, she had written in her notebook some of the assignments and the homework that we're working through. And her notes started disappearing. And she sent me a photo of it. I couldn't believe it. It almost looked like she wrote in magic ink. And it's fascinating when this happens because I've experienced not my notes disappearing, but going into a different version of my apartment and picking up my manifestation notebook, seeing my handwriting, but seeing different notes that are actually in my pages. It's wild, absolutely wild. Different things on my counter and a parking ticket that I didn't even know that I had, like a parking garage ticket that I guess I kept for some weird reason from an ex that I left their apartment building at 11:11, and years later in a different city, in a different state, it just happened to be out on my counter when I was interweaving a reality layer where there was a manifestation that was active with them. And all happy, but it was really wild. It was just really, really bizarre. So what you want to do is you don't want to be completely off your rocker insane. And to be illogical, especially in a world that expects you to be logical, it's dangerous. You can get yourself locked up very, very quickly. And so it requires a delicate touch in understanding what is going on with your cognition. And this is why I believe it's very, very important to balance the experience of reality shifting as almost like this wave of magic and wonder and joy that's coming to you, that at first, when the tide comes in, the waves will, if you're standing at some location on the beach, the waves at first might not actually catch your feet. But over the course of the hours, the waves will get closer and closer, and then they'll pull back and they'll get closer and closer. And the next thing you know, the waves are tickling your toes. And the next thing you know, another wave is coming and it's pulling the sand out from under your feet. And then it's up to your knees, and then it pulls back. And so what you want to do is you want to allow for the reality shifting experience to caress you like a wave, and not hold on to it too tightly at first. Just make room for its existence. That's the most important step. And work on actually building a second explanation. That's all you need to do at first. The first explanation very often is rational and logical. And when it doesn't make sense, it can be a little disconcerting. That's when having a sense of humor is to your benefit. And having somebody to talk to about reality shifting events on a Discord server or Reddit, or even here in the comments, you're welcome to talk about your shift events. What that does is that helps you practice creating space in a safe community environment that shift events, probable shift events, might be happening. And when you leave that wiggle room, what it does is it allows your brain to remain optimistic, because then you can go with the flow a lot better. And if you're jumping around, or if you're shifting in and out, or if you're getting pulled back to a baseline, it's very normal. It happens. It reduces the disappointment. It reduces the expectation, because it sets the orientation of the mind to see it kind of like a wave tickling your feet. So listen, I am indeed a reality shifting coach. If you feel the call to work together, you will know. And you're welcome to reach out to me for a consult. And you can do so at sacredjourneyproductions@gmail.com.